So, when you think of Nigeria's economy, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most people, it's oil. But what if I told you the real engine of Africa's largest economy is something else entirely? Well, today, we're digging past the headlines to find out what truly powers Nigeria. All right, so let's get right into it. What really powers this economic giant? Well, it kind of boils down to three huge things. First up, and this is a big one, it's the people. We're talking over 150 million people. That makes Nigeria not just the biggest country in Africa by population, but the seventh largest in the entire world. I mean, just think about that. That's a massive engine right there, a huge workforce and a gigantic market for goods. And then there's the land. We're talking a huge space, over 900,000 square kilometers. But here's the kicker. About 85% of that land is actually good for farming. That's a really important piece of the puzzle. Keep that number in your head because it's going to come back in a big way. And yeah, of course, we have to talk about the oil. Nigeria is sitting on a massive amount of natural resources, including, get this, over 36 billion barrels of crude oil. Now, this is what you always hear about on the news, right? But here's the thing. It's just one piece of a way, way bigger picture. Okay, so you've got the people, you've got the land, and you've got all these resources. So what happens next? Well, the system that takes all of that stuff and organizes it to, actually meet the needs of everyone living there, that's what an economy is. And Nigeria's has a really interesting structure. So let's break down that structure. It's basically built on three main sectors, which is pretty common for most economies today. You've got the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary sectors. And once you see how they all connect, the whole picture just clicks. Okay, and this is where things get really interesting, and maybe not what you were expecting. Because while everyone talks about industry and oil, just look at this chart. The primary sector, which is basically all agriculture, is actually the single biggest slice of the pie. It brings in more money than anything else. Crazy, right? So here's an easy way to think about it all. The primary sector, that's all about pulling raw stuff out of the ground. Think farming, fishing, that kind of thing. Then you have the secondary sector, which takes all that raw stuff and turns it into something else, like turning crude oil into gasoline or cotton into a t-shirt. And finally, the tertiary sector is all the services that make the other two work, like banking, shipping, and all the shops. All right, so since agriculture is such a huge deal for Nigeria's economy, we really need to dig in a little deeper here. Let's take a closer look inside this massive agricultural engine. So, what are we really talking about when we say agriculture? Well, the textbook definition is pretty simple. It's just growing crops and raising animals for people to use. But use is a really broad word here. It's not just about the food on your dinner table. It's also the raw materials for your clothes, parts of your house, and so much of what our industries depend on. And this huge activity is really made up of four key parts. First, you've got crop production. That's the obvious one. Then there's livestock farming, raising animals. You also have forestry, which is managing all the trees and forests. And finally, of course, there's fishing. Each one of these is a massive industry in its own right. Now, when we talk about growing crops, there's a really important split you need to know about. On one hand, you have what are called cash crops, things like cocoa and rubber. The whole point of these is to be sold, either as raw materials for factories or for export to other countries. But then on the other hand, you have the food crops, your yams, your cassava, your rice. These are grown mainly just to feed people right there in the country. Okay, but it's not like all farming looks the same, right? I mean, across that huge amount of farmable land we talked about earlier, you're going to see a bunch of different ways of doing things. So let's check out the main systems they've got going on. The range of farming in Nigeria is it's huge. So you've got everything from what you might call peasant or subsistence farming. That's basically a small farm using simple tools, just trying to grow enough food for the family. Then, on the complete opposite end of the scale, you have massive, mechanized farms that are all about commercial production and profit. And in the middle, you find other systems, like huge plantations that focus on one type of crop, and also cooperative farming. That's a really cool one, where smaller farmers team up, pool their resources, and can compete on a much bigger scale. So yeah, they all have a part to play. So we've seen that agriculture is the biggest sector. So what? Why is that so important? What does it actually mean for the economy and for the people living in Nigeria? Well, first and foremost, it's jobs. Plain and simple. agriculture is by far the biggest employer in the entire country. We're talking about a livelihood for a huge, huge chunk of the population. For millions and millions of people, farming isn't just a job, it's how they survive. And it's also about, eating. This sector is literally the foundation of the country's food security. It's what puts the rice, the yam, the fish on everyone's plate. It doesn't matter if you're a factory worker or a banker, you need to eat, and that food comes from this sector. But it doesn't even stop there. Agriculture is also what fuels local industry. I mean, think about it. Where do you think textile factories get their cotton? Where do soap makers get their palm oil? Or tire companies get their rubber? Yep, it all comes right back to agriculture. And finally, let's look at the bigger picture, the international stage. Agriculture is a huge moneymaker for Nigeria. When they export those cash crops we talked about, like cocoa and rubber, it brings in a ton of foreign money. And that currency is absolutely essential for the country to trade and to grow. So there you have it. While oil always seems to get all the attention, it's pretty clear that agriculture is the real bedrock, the true engine of Nigeria's economy. It creates jobs, it feeds the nation, and it supplies the factories. So that really leaves us with one big, important question, doesn't it? What's next? And how can this incredible engine be made even stronger to power Nigeria's future?